They say time heals all wounds. But when I saw my late husband's car missing from our garage, the pain cut deeper than ever. My own son had sold it for a luxury vacation. He thought I wouldn't find out, but he had no idea what that car truly meant, or what I was about to do next. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you love true emotional stories with powerful life lessons, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because this story is going to remind you that karma never forgets. My name is Margaret Thompson, and I'm 63 years old. I live in a quiet town just outside Denver, Colorado, in the same white farmhouse my husband, Richard, and I bought 40 years ago. Every inch of that house holds a piece of our story, from the oak tree he planted in the yard to the rust-red barn he rebuilt with his own hands. But the one thing that truly carried his soul was his 1968 Ford Mustang Fastback. It wasn't just a car. It was Richard's dream. He spent years restoring it, sanding, painting, replacing every piece with patience and love. Every weekend I'd bring him lemonade while he worked in the garage, music playing on the old radio, grease on his hands and a smile on his face. When he died 5 years ago after a heart attack, that car became my last living connection to him. Every morning, I'd open the garage just to see it there, polished, gleaming, quiet, as if waiting for him to come back and take it for one last drive. It wasn't about money, it was about memory, about love. My son David knew that. At 34, he had a good job in tech, a new wife named Samantha, and a life in the city. We weren't as close as we used to be, but I thought we understood each other, at least enough for him to know what that car meant. But I was wrong. It happened one Friday morning in April. I was out visiting a friend in the next town. When I returned that evening, the garage door was open. At first I thought maybe I'd forgotten to close it. Then I looked inside. The space was empty, completely empty. The Mustang was gone. My knees gave out right there on the concrete. I called David immediately. He didn't answer. Then he texted, "Hey Mom, I'll call you later. Don't worry, everything's fine." My heart sank. I knew something wasn't fine. I checked the security camera, the small one Richard had installed years ago. The footage made my stomach twist. There was David, my son, unlocking the garage, opening the door, talking to a man I didn't recognize, a man in a leather jacket with a tow truck behind him. And then they loaded the car, drove away, just like that. I didn't sleep that night. My hands shook as I tried to call him again. The next morning, he finally picked up. "Mom, before you freak out," he said quickly, "I can explain." "Explain?" I shouted. "David, where is your father's car?" He sighed. "Mom, I needed the money, okay? Samantha and I are going to Paris next month. It's her birthday trip. She's always dreamed of it. I sold the Mustang to a dealership in town. Don't worry, I got a good price." My voice broke. "You sold your father's car. For a vacation?" He tried to sound calm. "Mom, it's just an old car. You never drive it. It was sitting there for years. I thought you'd understand." "Understand?" He couldn't possibly. That car wasn't metal and paint, it was Richard. It was his laughter, his hard work, his memory. And my son, our son, had sold it for a few photos in Paris. For days I didn't speak to anyone. I didn't eat. I couldn't even walk into the garage. But then, something unexpected happened. A week later I got a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Thompson?" A deep male voice said. "This is Alan Morris. I own the dealership on Lincoln Avenue. I believe your son sold us a '68 Mustang last week?" My heart froze. "Yes," I whispered. "Well," he continued, "I was going through the paperwork and noticed something odd. The title wasn't signed by you, it's in your name. Not your son's, legally. He couldn't sell it without your permission. I just wanted to make sure everything was okay." I went silent for a moment. Then I said slowly, "No, Mr. Morris, everything is not okay." He hesitated. "I thought so. Listen, ma'am, I haven't listed the car yet. It's still here in the back lot. If you want, I can hold it for you until we figure this out." My eyes filled with tears. Please don't sell it. "I'll come tomorrow." That night I couldn't stop shaking, but not from sadness. From something else. Something I hadn't felt in years. Determination. David had betrayed his father's memory. He'd broken my trust. But he wasn't going to get away with it. If karma needed help finding him, I'd gladly deliver it myself. The next morning, I drove to the dealership. The sun was bright, but my heart was cold. When I saw the car, Richard's Mustang, sitting there in perfect condition, the tears came all over again. I touched the hood gently. "Welcome home," I whispered. Mr. Morris walked over. "You know," he said kindly, "I could have sold this for over 70 grand. But something told me to check the papers first." "Good thing I did." I nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Morris. You just saved a piece of my life." He smiled. "You're lucky. Most dealers wouldn't call. I've seen plenty of family disputes, but this one feels personal." I smiled faintly. "It is." Before leaving, I had an idea. "Mr. Morris," I asked, "can you print me a copy of the sale agreement my son signed?" He raised an eyebrow. "Sure, but why?" I smiled. "Let's just say, I'm not done yet." As I left the dealership, I looked at the car one last time and whispered to myself, "Richard, I'm going to make this right." That night I opened my laptop and began my plan. David thought I was weak, that I'd let it go because I'm old, quiet, harmless. But he forgot who taught him everything about honesty, respect, and love. He forgot that his father's fire still burned in me. He sold a car, but I was about to make him lose something far more valuable. Not money, his pride, and maybe, just maybe, he'd finally learn what family truly means. The night after I recovered the Mustang, I barely slept. I kept thinking about David's face and that calm, careless look he had when he said, "It's just an old car, Mom." Those words replayed in my head like a song I couldn't turn off. He wasn't sorry. He wasn't even ashamed, and that hurt more than anything. So I decided I wouldn't yell. I wouldn't cry in front of him. Instead, I'd teach him a lesson he would never forget. The next morning, I called Alan Morris, the dealership owner who had saved me from losing Richard's car. "Mr. Morris," I said over the phone, "thank you again for holding the Mustang for me. I've been thinking about something." He sounded curious. "Sure, what's on your mind?" "I want to buy it back, officially. But not just that. I want the bill of sale, the contract, every document my son signed, and I'd like to pay the same amount he received in cash." There was a pause. "Mrs. Thompson," he said gently, "you don't need to do that. You're the legal owner. The car is yours already." I smiled slightly. "Yes, I know, but I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing it for him." He chuckled softly. "Sounds like a story there." "Oh, there is," I replied. "And it's only just beginning." The plan. That afternoon I went to my bank and withdrew $70,000, the amount David told me he sold the car for. It was most of my savings, but I didn't care. This wasn't about money. When I walked into the dealership with that cashier's check, Alan looked surprised. "You're serious," he said. I nodded, more than I've ever been. He gave me the keys, the bill of sale, and a copy of the contract David had forged under my name. When I saw the fake signature, my hands trembled. "Mr. Morris," I said quietly, "would you mind notarizing this transaction for me?" "Of course," he said. "But why?" I smiled. "Because this is step one." That night I called my lawyer, a kind older man named Robert Fields who had handled Richard's estate years ago. "Margaret," he said when he heard my voice, "it's been too long. How are you?" I hesitated. "Robert, I need your help." "It's about my son." Within an hour I was sitting in his office downtown, explaining everything, the sale, the forged signature, the dealership call, and how David had taken the money without my permission. Robert listened carefully, then leaned back in his chair. "Well," he said, "your son committed a felony, forgery and fraud. You could press charges. He could lose his job, even face jail time." I sighed. "I don't want to ruin his life, Robert. I just want him to understand what he's done. I want him to feel it." He smiled knowingly. "You're a good mother, and I think I can help you with that." He explained a plan. Instead of filing criminal charges, we'd send a formal notice to David's home, a legal letter stating that his sale of the car was fraudulent, that I had reclaimed ownership, and that all proceeds must be returned within 10 business days. If he failed to comply, I could pursue both civil and criminal action. I liked the sound of that. It wasn't revenge through anger. It was revenge through truth. When I got home, I parked the Mustang back in the garage exactly where it belonged. For the first time in weeks, I felt peace, but only for a moment. Because soon, I'd have to face David. 3 days later, I sat by the window watching the mail truck roll down the street. I knew David would get the letter that day. Sure enough, my phone rang that evening. Mom! His voice was tense, sharp. What the hell is this? Some kind of joke? I stayed calm. It's no joke. David, you forged my signature and sold property that wasn't yours. That's fraud. He groaned. Mom, you can't be serious. I told you I just needed the money. Samantha. Stop, I interrupted. This isn't about Samantha. This is about your father. That car was his legacy, David. You didn't just sell metal, you sold memory. You sold respect. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said coldly, You're overreacting. You're just old and emotional. That broke something in me. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just said maybe, but I'm also right. Then I hung up. 2 days later, he showed up at my house unannounced. He looked tired, angry, and maybe, just maybe, a little scared. Mom, he started, can we talk? I nodded silently and led him to the kitchen. He sat down, rubbed his forehead. Look, I didn't mean to hurt you. I just thought. You thought what? I asked softly. That I'd never find out? That your father's car meant nothing? That I'd just sit here while you took everything he left behind? He avoided my eyes. Mom, Samantha's been under a lot of stress, he muttered. She wanted a break. I didn't think you'd care so much about some old Mustang. I leaned forward. Then maybe that's the problem, David, you don't think. You've forgotten where you come from. You've forgotten what integrity means. He sighed. So what now? You gonna take me to court? Embarrass me in front of everyone? I smiled sadly. No, David, I don't need to embarrass you. You've already done that yourself. He blinked. What do you mean? I stood up and handed him a folder. The notarized papers from the dealership, the forged signature, the legal letter from my attorney. Your father taught me to fight fair, I said. So I'm giving you a choice. You can make this right, return the money, apologize and learn something from this, or you can keep pretending nothing happened. And I'll let the law do what it does best. He stared at the papers for a long time. His hands shook. Then he looked up at me, eyes red. Mom, I didn't realize. I thought it'd make Samantha happy.
I said softly, if she needs Paris to be happy,
then maybe you're both chasing the wrong kind of dream. He didn't answer. He just stood up and left. That night I sat alone in the living room, staring at the old photo of Richard holding the Mustang keys. Did I do the right thing? I whispered. In my heart I knew I had, because sometimes love means being gentle, and sometimes it means letting someone hit the bottom before they can climb back up. 2 weeks passed. I heard nothing from David. Then one evening I got a call. Not from him, but from Samantha. Mrs. Thompson, she said coldly, I don't know what kind of drama you started, but David's been suspended from work. They found out about the forged sale. His boss called him a liability. I stayed quiet. Are you happy now? She snapped. No, I said softly. But maybe someday. You both will be, once you learn what real happiness looks like. She hung up. I sat there in silence, staring out the window as the sun went down. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel weak. I felt strong. Because Richard's car was home. Justice had begun, and karma had just knocked on my son's door. After that phone call from Samantha, my house felt quieter than ever. Even the ticking clock on the wall seemed louder, heavier, as if time itself was judging me. I didn't hate my son. I hated what he'd become. Someone who traded love for luxury, honesty for comfort, but deep inside, beneath all the anger, I still wanted him to find his way back. Not for me, not even for Richard, but for himself. It had been nearly 3 weeks since David last called. Then one cold Sunday morning, I heard a knock on the door. When I opened it, I almost didn't recognize him. He looked different. His usually neat hair was messy, his face pale, his eyes tired. He wasn't wearing his fancy jacket or watch, just an old hoodie and jeans. Hi, Mom, he said quietly. I didn't answer right away. I just stepped aside and let him in. He walked into the living room and sat down slowly, like someone carrying the weight of the world. I wanted to apologize, he began, his voice trembling. You were right about everything. I stayed silent, waiting. He took a deep breath. After you sent that letter, things got bad. My company found out about the forgery. Apparently, legal notices like that become public record. My boss said I'd compromised the company's reputation and trust. He looked down. They suspended me indefinitely, I could tell he was ashamed. But that wasn't all. His eyes looked hollow as if something else had happened. "And Samantha?" I asked gently. He gave a bitter laugh. She left. Said she didn't sign up for legal drama and financial stress. She went back to her parents' place in California. She hasn't called since. He rubbed his temples. I've been staying in my apartment trying to sell furniture just to pay rent. It's like everything's falling apart. I wanted to hug him, but I didn't, not yet. "David," I said softly, "sometimes things have to fall apart before we can rebuild them." He looked up, tears welling. "I know I messed up. I disrespected Dad's memory and I hurt you. I don't even know how to fix this." I reached over and placed my hand on his. "You already started, son, by admitting it." For the first time, I saw my little boy again, not the man chasing vacations or luxury, but the son who used to help his dad polish that Mustang on Sundays. He glanced toward the garage. "Can I see it?" I nodded. We walked out together, the air crisp and quiet. When I opened the garage door, sunlight spilled over the car's sleek body. It looked just like it did the day Richard finished restoring it. David froze. He stepped closer and ran his hand over the hood, his voice breaking. "I don't deserve to look at this." I smiled sadly. "No, you don't. But your father always believed people deserve second chances." He swallowed hard. I forgot what this meant. I forgot who I was raised by. Then softly he whispered, "I'm sorry, Dad." Over the next few weeks, things slowly began to change. David started visiting every few days, helping me around the house, fixing the porch steps, cleaning the gutters, even mowing the lawn. He didn't ask for forgiveness again. He just showed it. One evening, I found him sitting in the garage with a wrench, working under the Mustang's hood. When I walked in, he smiled faintly. "Just tuning her up," he said. "Figured she deserves better than sitting still." For a moment, it felt like Richard was there too, his ghost smiling proudly somewhere in that garage. A month later, David got a call from his boss. They were impressed by how he'd handled the aftermath, taking accountability, fixing what he could, and not hiding from the consequences. They reinstated him, not at his old position, but at a smaller branch with fewer privileges, and that was exactly what he needed. He came over that night grinning like a kid. "Mom, I got my job back." I hugged him tight. "I'm proud of you, David." Then he said something that melted my heart. "I've been saving up. I want to buy the Mustang from you. Properly this time. Not because I want it, but because I want to earn it." I smiled. "You don't have to, son. She's already yours, and when the time is right." He shook his head. "No, I want to do it the right way. Dad would have wanted that." I nodded, tears in my eyes. He would have. Time passed. The seasons changed, and somehow our family, like small and broken as it was, began to heal. But life has a way of testing us again, just when we think we've learned enough. It was late autumn when I got a letter, and this time, addressed to me from the county courthouse. Apparently David's ex-wife, Samantha, had filed a claim for part of the sale money from the Mustang, the same money he no longer had. It felt like history repeating itself. David was furious, ready to fight, but I stopped him. "Son," I said calmly, "you can't fix every problem with anger. Let this one go. She's chasing something that doesn't exist anymore." He hesitated, then nodded. "You're right. I'm done fighting ghosts." That was the day I realized he'd finally grown up. One snowy morning, months later, I stood on the porch as David pulled up in his small truck. He jumped out smiling, carrying a small box. "Got something for you," he said. Inside the box was a silver keychain, a replica of the Mustang, engraved with the words, "For Dad, and for the woman who never gave up on me." I couldn't hold back my tears. He handed me the keys to the car and said, "I think it's your turn to take her for a drive." I laughed softly. "Are you sure you trust me with this beauty?" He smiled. "I trust you more than anyone, Mom." So we drove, down the same road Richard and I used to take decades ago. The wind in my hair, the sun warm on my face, and David beside me. For the first time in years, my heart was light. When we reached the overlook, the one with the mountain view, I parked the car and looked out over the valley. "You know," I said, "your father used to say a car isn't about the miles you drive. It's about the memories you make." David smiled. "Then this one's full of both." I looked at him, truly looked at him, and realized that my son wasn't lost anymore. Karma had done its work. Regret had turned into growth. And justice had come full circle, not through punishment, but through understanding. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and red, David said quietly, "I'm going to make him proud, Mom, I promise." I took his hand and whispered, "You already have." Winter slowly melted into spring, and the Thompson farmhouse began to feel alive again. The snow outside gave way to green. The birds returned, and for the first time in years, the sound of laughter echoed through the house, mine and David's. It was strange, really. After so much pain, regret, and silence, peace felt almost unfamiliar, but I cherished it. One Saturday morning, David came over earlier than usual. He had a strange excitement in his voice when he said, "Mom, I've been thinking about something and about Dad." I smiled softly. "I think about him every day."
What about him?
David took a deep breath. "You know how much he loved that car, and how much he believed in restoring things. I want to do something with that." He reached into his bag and pulled out a stack of papers. "I've been working on a small business plan," he continued. "I want to open a classic car restoration garage and name it after Dad, Richard's Legacy Garage, not just to fix cars, but to mentor young mechanics who can't afford training." I stared at him, speechless. He kept talking, his words full of purpose. "There are kids out there who love cars but never get a chance to learn. Dad used to say the best mechanics aren't the ones who know engines. They're the ones who love stories behind them. I want to pass that on." For the first time, I saw something new in his eyes. Not guilt, not greed, but grace. Richard would have been proud. We spent the next few months planning everything together. David worked extra hours at his new job, saving every penny. I helped him with paperwork, permits, and small business loans. Sometimes late at night, we'd sit at the kitchen table surrounded by receipts and coffee cups, laughing over memories of Richard dropping wrenches or swearing when bolts got stuck. For the first time since he died, the pain of his absence turned into something beautiful. By early summer, the building was ready. A small workshop on the edge of town, with 2 bays, a fresh coat of blue paint, and a sign that read in bold silver letters, "Richard's Legacy Garage, restoring cars, rebuilding lives." On opening day, I stood beside David as he cut the red ribbon. A few neighbors, some old friends of Richard's, and a handful of curious locals gathered to watch. There were cameras from the local newspaper, too. They loved the story of a son honoring his father's name after a rough past. David spoke for a moment, his voice shaking with emotion. "When I was younger, I didn't understand what my dad's car meant. I thought it was just metal and paint. But I've learned that sometimes, the things we take for granted hold the biggest lessons. This garage is for him, and for anyone who's ever needed a second chance." When he finished, the crowd clapped. Some even wiped tears. I just stood there smiling, my heart full. As the weeks passed, the garage started to flourish. Teenagers from local schools came in to learn. Older mechanics volunteered to teach, and soon, Richard's Legacy became more than a garage. It became a place of hope. One afternoon, I drove the Mustang there for the first time. When David saw it, he grinned. "You're actually driving it again?" I laughed. "You said it yourself, cars are meant to move." We parked it right inside the front bay, under a spotlight with a plaque beside it that read, "The car that started it all." People who came in would stop, read the story, and look at the car like it was a relic of something sacred. And in a way, it was. One evening, a young boy named Ethan came to the garage with his mother. He was only 16, quiet and shy, but his eyes lit up when he saw the Mustang. David noticed. "You like Mustangs, huh?" Ethan nodded. "My dad used to work on one before he passed away." David smiled kindly. "Then you're in the right place. You want to learn how to fix one?" The boy's face brightened. "Really?" David nodded. "Really." That night, I watched from the corner as my son taught Ethan how to change oil, explaining every tool, every step, just like Richard used to teach him. And for a moment, it felt like history had looped back, not in punishment this time, but in redemption. Months later, the garage was running smoothly. Ethan and 2 other students were learning quickly, and the town started recognizing David's name again, not for his mistakes, but for his growth. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, David closed the garage door and turned to me. "You know, Mom," he said quietly, "I think I finally get what Dad meant when he said legacy isn't what you leave for someone. It's what you leave in them." I nodded. "You've built something real, David. Not just a business, and a purpose. He smiled. I couldn't have done it without you. I chuckled. Oh, yes, you could have, but I'm glad you didn't. We both laughed, the kind of easy, genuine laughter that only comes after long storms. Later that night, I went home, made myself some tea, and sat on the porch. The stars were bright, and the world felt peaceful again. I looked up and whispered, "You'd be proud of him, Richard." And in the stillness of the night, I could almost feel his presence, like a soft breeze brushing my cheek. Maybe it was just the wind, or maybe it was his way of saying, "You did good, Maggie." The next day, I went to the garage again. But this time, David had a surprise waiting for me. He led me to a small covered shape under a tarp. "I've been working on something secretly," he said. "For you." When he pulled the cover off, I gasped. It was an old Chevy pickup, painted the same pale blue as our house. The license plate read, Mom 68. "I found it at an auction," he said. "Figured you deserve your own classic." Tears welled in my eyes. "Oh, David. It's beautiful." He smiled. "Now you can drive beside the Mustang just like you and Dad used to." I hugged him tightly, my heart overflowing. Sometimes karma doesn't just punish, it teaches. And sometimes it gives back more than it ever took. That evening we went for a drive. Me in the Chevy, him in the Mustang. 2 cars, 2 generations, 1 legacy. We drove down the open road, the wind singing through the trees, the sky glowing orange with sunset. And I realized something simple, something powerful. The past doesn't have to define us, but it can guide us if we're brave enough to learn from it. That night, as we parked both cars side by side in the garage, David turned to me and said, "You know, Mom, when I sold Dad's car, I thought I was chasing happiness, but I was really running from emptiness. All of this is what happiness actually feels like." I smiled, brushing a tear away. "And that's how karma works, son. It doesn't destroy and it rebuilds." He nodded quietly. "I finally understand." It was a warm Saturday morning when the town of Willow Springs gathered for the annual Classic Car Festival. The event had been going on for decades, but this year, it was different. This year, it carried a name that mattered. Right at the center of the flyers, printed in bold blue letters, were the words, "Special tribute in memory of Richard Thompson, the heart behind every engine." When David first told me the committee wanted to dedicate this year's show to Richard, I couldn't speak for a full minute. All I could do was nod, my throat tightening with emotion. The morning of the festival. The morning sun bathed the small town in gold. The streets were lined with shining cars, polished chrome reflecting the light like mirrors. Families laughed, photographers clicked, and kids ran around holding ice cream cones. But at the far end of the line, in the honorary display spot, sat the Mustang. Richard's Mustang. Perfectly restored, clean, proud, timeless. Next to it stood David, wearing his father's old leather jacket. The same one he used to wear on Sunday drives. When I arrived, David turned toward me and grinned. "Looks like she's back where she belongs, huh?" I nodded, touching the car's hood gently. He'd be smiling right now. David looked at the crowd beginning to form. "We're up next for the tribute speech." I chuckled nervously. I didn't know I'd be speaking. He smiled. "I figured you'd have something better to say than me." I laughed softly. "Oh, you're not getting out of it that easily. We'll do it together. The tribute speech." When it was our turn, we stepped up to the small stage near the Mustang. The microphone squeaked once and the crowd quieted down. I took a deep breath and began. My husband Richard loved this town. He loved its people, its roads, and every engine that ran through it. But more than that, he loved teaching others. He believed every car had a story, and that every person could rebuild, no matter how broken they felt. I paused for a moment, my voice trembling slightly. When we lost him, I thought his story had ended. But it hadn't, it just changed hands. I looked at David, who smiled with misty eyes. Today, his legacy lives on, not just in this Mustang, but in every person who chooses to build rather than break, to forgive rather than forget. The crowd clapped gently. Then David stepped forward and continued. "I made a lot of mistakes in my life," he said honestly. "I hurt the people who loved me most, and I lost sight of what my father stood for. But someone once told me, redemption isn't about undoing the past. It's about honoring it." He gestured toward the Mustang behind us. "This car isn't just a machine. It's a reminder that even after the worst mistakes, You can start the engine again." The crowd erupted in applause. Some people were crying. And for a moment, standing there, the wind blowing gently, the Mustang gleaming in the sunlight, I felt like Richard was right there beside us. The parade. After the speeches, the announcer called for the tribute ride, a slow drive, through town by all the classic cars, led by one special vehicle. The lead car, Richard's Mustang. David looked at me. "You should drive it, Mom." I shook my head quickly. "Oh no, this is your turn." But he smiled. "We drive it together, just like you and Dad used to." I hesitated and then nodded. We got in. I slid into the passenger seat, the leather soft and familiar. David started the engine, that same low, powerful growl I hadn't heard in years. As the car rolled forward, the crowd cheered. Children waved flags, old friends clapped, and the local radio host narrated live. Leading our parade today, Richard Thompson's restored 1968 Mustang, driven by his wife and son, a symbol of love, legacy, and forgiveness. Tears welled in my eyes as we drove down Main Street. Every storefront, every face, every sound, it all felt like a memory unfolding in motion. I could almost hear Richard's voice teasing. "Shift to second, Maggie, don't baby her." I laughed softly and David looked at me confused. "Dad," I said. He smiled and nodded silently. Yeah, I heard him too. A visit to the old field. After the parade ended, we didn't go straight home. Instead, David drove us out of town, down a long country road, past open fields until we reached a quiet hill overlooking the lake. It was the same spot where Richard and I used to come during our early years. Before the house, before the kids, before everything. David parked the car, turned off the engine, and we sat in silence for a while just listening to the wind. "I wanted to bring it here," he said softly. "Dad always said this was his favorite view." I smiled faintly. He used to say the same thing to me. Said it reminded him that life keeps moving like the water below. We sat there until the sun began to set. The sky painted in shades of orange and purple, the lake glowing gold. David took out a small box from his pocket. "I found this in Dad's old toolbox," he said. "It's his keychain, the one with the silver Mustang emblem." He handed it to me. "It belongs here, with the car." I took it gently, feeling the familiar cold metal in my palm. "Thank you," I whispered. Then I leaned forward and hung the keychain on the rearview mirror. For a moment, the sunlight caught the silver emblem, and it sparkled, just once like a wink from heaven. We stayed there until night fell. The crickets began their chorus and the stars came out one by one. That's when David said something that caught me off guard. "Mom, I've been thinking about Dad's car and what it means now. I want to give it to the museum downtown." I turned to him surprised. "The museum?" He nodded. "They asked if we'd consider loaning it for their American Legacy exhibit. It'll inspire people. Tell Dad's story, our story. I think it's where it belongs." I hesitated. "Are you sure? After everything?" He smiled gently. "I've already had my second chance. Mom, now it's time for the Mustang to have its own." I felt tears again, not of pain this time, but of pride. "Then let's do it," I said softly. "Let's share him with the world." The final ride home. Before we left, David started the car one last time that night. The headlights illuminated the road ahead, and the old Mustang purred like it knew this was its goodbye drive home. As we drove back toward town, I looked out the window, the wind brushing against my face. I thought about all we had lost and all we had found again. Forgiveness, redemption, peace. That was the real revenge, not anger, not destruction, but watching life heal in places where it once broke. When we pulled into the driveway, David parked the car next to my blue Chevy pickup. He turned off the engine and said quietly, "You know, Mom, I think Dad's happy now." I smiled, tears shining in the porch light. "I know he is." We sat there for a long moment, neither of us saying anything. Just the sound of the crickets, the warm air, and two hearts finally at rest. The day the Mustang left our garage was one I'll never forget. The morning light streamed through the open bay doors of Richard's Legacy garage, catching every curve and chrome detail of the car that had been part of our lives for decades. Neighbors gathered quietly outside, some with cameras, others simply watching in respectful silence. A flatbed truck stood waiting near the curb, not for a sale this time, but for an honor. The Willow Springs Heritage Museum had offered a permanent exhibit space to showcase the Mustang, along with Richard's photo, the story of the garage and the journey of redemption that followed. As the curator gently loaded the car, I stood by holding my hands together, trying to keep them from shaking. It wasn't sadness. It was something deeper, completion. The museum arrival. When we arrived downtown, the museum staff guided us into a bright glass hall filled with polished cars and old Americana memorabilia. At the center stood a display stand with a gold plaque already mounted reading, Richard's Mustang, a legacy of love, loss, and renewal. Donated by Margaret and David Thompson, in honor of second chances and the road home. I couldn't help but smile. David squeezed my hand and whispered, "He'd love this, Mom." "I know," I whispered back. He always wanted that car to mean something. The curator turned to me. "Mrs. Thompson, we'd love for you to say a few words for the dedication video. Just something from the heart." I nodded. My throat tightened, but I stepped forward. Looking straight into the camera, I spoke slowly. This car began as my husband's passion project, a symbol of his patience and pride. Years later, it became a lesson for our family, that even when something precious is lost, love can rebuild it stronger than before. I glanced at David, who smiled softly, eyes glistening. We learned that forgiveness isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about choosing what happens next. And sometimes, the road to healing is paved with the very things that once broke you. When I finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Life after the Mustang. Weeks passed. The garage continued to thrive, teaching young students and bringing life back into our community. David had become a mentor now, the same way Richard once mentored him. He was patient, kind, and surprisingly gentle, especially with the nervous ones who were scared to touch their first wrench. I often visited, bringing lunch and sometimes staying for hours just to watch. Every time I walked in, I'd see that same framed picture of Richard, smiling in front of the old Mustang, hanging above the main workbench. Underneath it, David had placed a small sign, built once by a father, rebuilt by a son. And that said everything. A letter in the mail. One afternoon, I received a letter in the mail, an official one, with the museum seal. Inside was a photo of the Mustang in its new home, polished, surrounded by spotlights, with a small bench in front of it for visitors to sit and reflect. On the back of the photo was a handwritten note from the curator. "Mrs. Thompson, every week we find fresh flowers left by the display. No one knows who's bringing them. But people stop, read your family story, and often walk away inspired. Your husband's legacy has touched countless hearts." I pressed the photo to my chest and smiled through tears. Some stories don't need endings. They just keep driving on through others. 1 year later, a year passed. The seasons turned again. And though life moved forward, the Mustang and Richard stayed with us in spirit. On the anniversary of his passing, David and I decided to visit the museum. When we arrived, there were more people than usual. Families, tourists, students, all gathered around the exhibit. I noticed something different. A small boy, maybe 10 years old, stood in front of the car, eyes wide with wonder. His father crouched beside him and said, "You see that car, buddy? The man who owned it never gave up on what he loved. That's what made it special." The boy nodded solemnly. "When I grow up, I want to build cars like him." I felt tears sting my eyes. David leaned closer and whispered, "Looks like Dad's still teaching people." I smiled. He always will. The quiet goodbye. That evening I sat alone in my garden, the air cool and sweet with spring. The sky glowed pink, and for a moment, I could hear the faint hum of an engine. Not real, but in memory. I thought back to everything that had happened. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the anger, and finally, the redemption. There was a time I thought revenge meant making someone hurt the way they hurt you, but I learned something much more powerful. True revenge isn't destruction. It's restoration. It's turning pain into purpose, guilt into gratitude, and loss into legacy. A final visit. Months later, I visited the museum alone one morning before it opened. The curator knew me well and let me in early. The hall was silent, sunlight streaming through the skylights onto the Mustang's polished body. I sat on the bench in front of it and whispered softly, "Hey, Richard, we did it." I smiled faintly. "Your boy grew up. He's doing things you'd be proud of. He's teaching, guiding, and helping others the way you once helped him." I paused, feeling the weight lift from my chest. Thank you, I whispered, for everything. And just then, a single ray of sunlight hit the windshield, lighting up the interior in a warm, golden glow. It almost felt like he was smiling. Full circle. When I stepped outside, David was waiting by my truck. He looked at me and said, "You okay, Mom?" I nodded, taking a deep breath. Yes, for the first time in a long time. I really am. He smiled. Dad would have loved that. We stood there for a moment, looking at the rising sun over the town, the same town that once whispered about our family's mistakes, now celebrating our story of forgiveness. I took his arm and said softly, "Let's go home." As we drove away, I glanced in the rear view mirror one last time, watching the museum fade into the distance, the sunlight reflecting off the glass where the Mustang rested. That car had witnessed love, loss, betrayal, and redemption, and now it stood still, eternal, as a symbol of what we became. Not broken, not bitter, but rebuilt. And just like that, the road came full circle.